Hello, and welcome to the Carneades live stream. We're going to see if this is working. Hello. I see some people in the chat. If you could tell me if it's working, that would be lovely. All right. It seems to have come on in some way. So, first, let me tell you a little bit about the video that you're going to be seeing during this. As I mentioned in the previous video explaining the live Q&A, you're not going to be seeing my face. I work for a lot of organizations such that some of my views might not mesh with their goals or might hurt some of the work that they're doing. So what you're going to be seeing is the process of me making the Hume face, the face of David Hume, which you have not yet seen on the channel. So this is the process. A lot of people ask me frequently about how do you do this? Do you use a program? Do you use some complicated algorithm? No, we do it by hand, taking the words, the name of the philosopher, and slowly putting it on their face. So that's what you get to see sped up quite quickly. Going on here while we are chatting today. Wow, I see a lot of people in the chat. That is wonderful. So first, we're going to get to questions in a sec. There's a couple things I'm going to tell you about that are going on at the channel that I'm really excited about. If anyone has checked out the website recently, you will see there have been some big changes. So we're going to talk about that. I'll talk about some ideas that I have for videos going forward, and then it's really up to you guys, anyone that wants to throw out any questions that aren't so personal as to require me to disclose my identity and therefore connect me with organizations that would be unhappy with me disclosing my identity on this channel, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about the website, and then we'll get started with some questions. So first off, the website is changing significantly. So, as some of you may be aware of, anyone that's followed the channel a lot, you have been told that I was living in West Africa and I've finally come back. I'm back in the States, as the case may be. And because I was in West Africa, I didn't have much access to internet. I had a lot of problems doing a lot of the things that are required to run a website and run a channel. So the website was pretty stagnant. It just had some of the videos that I had put up, and they just kind of stayed there. It wasn't very much more useful than the YouTube channel. There was kind of a contact form where you could submit your beliefs, but otherwise there wasn't that much functionality of it. That is changing. Right now we are turning the website into a place for people to actually take quizzes on the videos and test their own understanding of the concepts we're presenting. As someone that has worked in education, it's important for students to be able to tell how they're doing. You watch a video, you're like, yeah, I really get that concept, but then you maybe try it in a class, or you try explaining to someone else and you're like, wow, I didn't really understand that at all. So the point of this is to have quizzes for you to test yourself and check your own understanding of some of the concepts that we have. Our hope right now, we're just starting with some courses. It has an under construction page on there, but you can actually get into the functionality of the website and start playing around with it, but don't get too married to anything that's going on in there. So that's what's going on with that. The website is coming along very slowly, but hopefully we will get some stuff up there. There'll be an official announcement through the channel when that is live and everything's ready. But if you want to test out some of the functionality and notice any problems or notice anything, feel free to go there, register. Everything's completely free. So do that and check that out. Hi and Hume to everyone that is watching. So, we're going to get to questions in a sec. I'm just going to go over a couple other quick things that are going on. So, as I said, this is the process that it takes to make Hume. No, I do not use some fancy software that does it for me. I just sit there and laboriously put the names in the spots on the face. Sometimes I do it with, as you're seeing on Hume, a line drawing that I can find on the internet. But more frequently I do it with just actual pictures, and that's how I do it. If you, on Patreon, go for the generous $50 a month pledge, and you want the face of philosophy, I just take a picture of you and do this process. And it's a little bit more difficult then, because this I just always have to fill in the lines. So, there's that. A couple other questions that that we've talked about. So some people were asking, "Oh, when is Aquinas coming? When is Aquinas coming?" We saw Aquinas on the philosophy of religion video. What I will say is, my next series on philosophy of religion is going to be St. Thomas Aquinas' Five Ways, and things back and forth with that. I don't know exactly when that's going to show up, but because we have too many series, as always, in production at the same time. But when we start back on philosophy of religion, the first thing I want to start with is St. Thomas Aquinas. So we'll look at a couple of questions. So in terms of Humean versus non-Humean laws, we'll do some videos on David Hume. David Hume, of course, is a famous skeptic. He's one of the representatives of the skepticism tradition that shows up in the early modern time period. I don't want to devote the whole video to just talking about Hume, so maybe we'll save that one for later. But thank you for your question. We will put on the list a video on Humean and non-Humean laws. In terms of questions about the quizzes, like the videos on logic problems, so the way the quizzes are going to work, they're actually going to have a bit more functionality. You'll get a question, it'll be a multiple choice question or a choose all of the answers that apply question on there. You get to click on them. You'll go through each video. Usually we'll have a set of questions, maybe 3 to 5 questions regarding that video, maybe more if it's a little bit longer. And then you will, at the end of that quiz, see how well you did. So you won't get the responses to each answer right away, so that you can go back and take the quiz again and take the quiz again until you kind of understand where you made your mistakes. So there'll actually be that. And then at the end of every series, so right now I just have the courses up on propositional logic, which is the first half of the 100 Days of Logic. And that's not even finished right now. So there's a set of quizzes, one after each video. They're 3 questions long. They're really quick and easy. And then there's a bit harder test at the end of every section. So at the end of the logical operations and each of those things, there is a test on that. So those are going on there, and those will be a little bit longer. They'll be a little bit more in depth, but they're still only going to be multiple choice questions. I'm thinking about probably what we're going to do when we actually have built that out a little bit more and we get full courses. What I really want to do is give people the opportunity to kind of take this as a course, but because philosophy isn't always just answering multiple choice questions and watching videos, the stuff that we'll want to do with that is give the person that takes the course the opportunity to, at the end of the course, make a video in response to one of my videos, either offering an objection or responding to one of the objections I talked about in a different way, and then they'll post that video somewhere, and I'll promote that video through the channel as this person completed this course, this person wrote this video, and maybe if I'm feeling industrious, I'll do my own response to their objections or their responses if it was a really interesting thing. And so we can kind of build out that community of people, not just watching philosophy and talking about philosophy in the comments, but really making their own videos and building that practice in. So let's go. I have a question from the original live Q&A video that I want to answer, and then I'll get to the question about philosophy of mind, because that's a really interesting question. So the question that someone posted, they said, "Oh, I can't be there on the live Q&A, but I want to post this question." They said that, how did I get into philosophy and how did I maintain my interest? So for me, philosophy is something that in younger grades, going through elementary school, middle school, high school, never had access to, never connected with, but I had a lot of ideas about things. I mean, my friends and I in middle school had come up with something that we called the theory of the advanced elves, because we were middle schoolers, which was the idea that you couldn't actually know anything because there could just be advanced elves messing with your mind or your understanding of something. We had never read Descartes, we had never read anything on skepticism, but this idea was so interesting to us that we talked about it and we thought about it and we discussed and debated it, and we actually had an art teacher that proposed to us the problem with our idea, which was I think, therefore I am, and we were mystified with this, and this got us started looking into Descartes a little bit, but as I said, we were middle schoolers, and that's a tough text to read. But it wasn't until I walked into a philosophy class later that I really realized, wow, this is a language I've been speaking my whole life, or this is a set of ideas that I've been tackling my whole life. I just haven't had the words to put with them or understood that people have been thinking about these things for the whole of time. And so that was really wonderful to me, for me to connect with something that I had not realized was already out there in the world, which is why I always encourage that we should teach philosophy at a younger age, not just to teach people how to argue correctly or how to understand flawed arguments, but also to really bring in that understanding of this is something that people have talked about for a really long time, and it would be great for kids to be able to connect with that earlier. So that's a piece on a question from an earlier video. Wow. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for all of your great comments. I love doing the work that I do. Thank you for the great support. So what do we have? We have a question on philosophy of mind. We've got, oh, goodness, on William Lane Craig, and most influential philosophical writing of the 20th century. Ooh, good questions. All right, so we'll start with the one on philosophy of mind. So, in terms of, well, it looks like the question is actually more on kind of metaphysics. Am I a dualist, an idealist, or a physicalist? The simplest answer is I'm a skeptic. So I don't believe any of those are perfectly true. I think there's problems, unfortunately, with all of dualism, idealism, and physicalism. In terms of physicalism, I think there are such worries about consciousness is just so spooky and strange. And yeah, you can bite the bullet and be a physicalist, but it can turn your stomach when you start thinking about things like philosophical zombies and things like that. In terms of idealism, it's just so counterintuitive when it comes to it, of that everything is in your mind. Once again, yes, it's possible, but how would you show it? How would you prove it? It seems very tough. And yes, I understand there's the whole things with people kind of explaining rules about uncertainty principles in terms of idealism, but I think when it comes down to it, that's just a misunderstanding of where the science and the physics is at right now. And that once we have really a better understanding of exactly how those principles play onto reality and what those principles mean for reality, and as science advances or we change our scientific paradigm, we may change those kind of philosophical interpretations of that. In terms of dualism, it kind of tries to solve some of the problems, but I still have trouble understanding how you could have these two importantly different substances interacting with each other. And really, that's my problem with idealism as well. I struggle to see the reasons that something would interact in one way as opposed to another, kind of going back to that rule of kind of why is something one way instead of another. There's a name for it that is escaping me right now. All right, sorry, I'll go to William Lane Craig next. So what debate, in your opinion, did William Lane Craig lose? Because it seems to me he wins almost every debate. So William Lane Craig, I assume that's what WLC stands for. William Lane Craig is a frustrating person in philosophy. In my mind, I liken him back to some of the people that Socrates argued with very early. While he may be very convincing, frequently he misrepresents philosophical arguments such that they seem convincing, and he puts them in such terms that, oh, obviously this is the case, and obviously this is the case, when actually maybe he's misrepresenting some of the ideas that are present there. So that always frustrates me. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I haven't watched specifically all of William Lane Craig's debates. I have looked into a number of his arguments. The modal ontological argument is just one of the most frustrating for me. I think that things like the cosmological argument ask interesting questions. I'm not convinced by them, but they ask interesting questions about why is the universe one way instead of another. Like that's a fascinating question. Why does the universe exist instead of not existing? Like that's an interesting question. And the religious people propose God, or the theists propose God as an answer to that question, and that to me it's a bit of an insufficient answer to a very fascinating question. But at least you're asking an interesting question. At least you're talking about something interesting. When you get to something like the modal ontological argument for the existence of God, that is just frustrating for me, because it's just taking kind of a misunderstanding of, it's putting a bunch of logical language onto a premise to the point that it becomes something that someone might assent to, and then demonstrating that if we take all that logical language off and we use these rules of logic, then we come up with the conclusion that God exists. And that's just, it's very frustrating for me, because you've taken a premise that someone would not agree with, you've made it complicated and confusing and make it seem like it's something they would agree with, and then taken all the logical language off and say, look, it's deductively valid that you agree with this claim. Well, no, you just made a claim that they already disagree with really complicated. So those are things that I would say William Lane Craig definitely loses on in terms of that. The column argument, he just represents an important misunderstanding of mathematics and infinity and that whole thing. I have a video on those couple things if you're interested. So check out my videos on philosophy of religion for more on that. The most influential philosophical writing of the 20th century? That's a very difficult question. I would say if we take the 20th century as a whole, Bertrand Russell, if we're looking for a writer, I'm a big fan of Bertrand Russell, even though despite his disagreements with the Skeptic, he did some very interesting writing, and he's a fascinating figure if you look into kind of some of the things that he did in his life. Check out my video. I think we have the video on Bertrand Russell up right now. He's fascinating. Also, he lived most of the 20th century. He lived for a long time. So if you're looking for a person that was really influential in the 20th century. In terms of a particular work, the one that jumps to mind right now, though I might say something else later if you caught me on a different day, would be Quine's Two Dogmas of Empiricism, just because it so succinctly was able to kind of demonstrate the problems in kind of the logical positivism movement and some of the ideas that they had about necessity and these kind of things. So if you're looking for a really interesting paper, check that out. I honestly am not aware of when this one was published, but the Gettier problem is a beautiful paper because it's so short, it's so simple, and it turns on its head a very central idea to philosophy. Oh, of course, knowledge is just true, justified belief, And we had always dug down in epistemology on, what do we mean by justified? What do we mean by belief? What do we mean by true? But I think it's wonderful that Gettier in such a simple paper can question that, well, wait a second. These conditions, maybe they aren't sufficient. Maybe even if I have true justified belief, maybe I don't quite yet have knowledge. So I would also say that's a wonderful paper if you're looking for something to read. Oh, goodness, we've gotten a lot of comments while I've been talking on. Thank you guys, everyone, for chatting and saying things. I'm sorry I ramble. Love to know my position on intuitionistic, I assume is what that is, logic, excluded middle, double negative. There are some really fascinating things with non-classical logics, and one day we will do a series on logic. My logic series, I like doing really big series and fully investigating the concepts. Right now, the one that we're looking at doing next is probably one on higher order logics and set theory, because that's been consistently requested, and it's also a very fascinating topic, and it plays in a lot with math. Eventually, we will get to non-classical logics. There's so many series that I want to do. I think that for a lot of non-classical logics, they end up, such as intuitionalistic logic, if I'm remembering that correctly, they end up taking basically some of the problems that exist in classical logic, but they have their own problems that they develop in other areas. And one of the difficult things with those is just because everyone's taught classical logic, everyone works and functions in the paradigm of classical logic. And so until you get to the point of having a lot of people working in intuitionistic logic or another non-classical logic, you won't get to the point of having someone come up with the solutions to those problems and maybe fixing all of logic or finding even more problems for that. So under-researched is what I would say for intuitionistic logic and for a wide range of non-classical logics. Is it true that there are only Plato people and Aristotle people? That is a wonderful question. I would say there are definitely more than just Plato people and Aristotle people, though clearly Plato and Aristotle had different views, and those fell into different traditions in terms of the Christians researching one and following one, and the Muslims researching and following another, and then eventually them coming back together and trying to reconcile their views. It's a fascinating question, but I would say there are a much wider range of people. There are Confucius people, or there are continental people. There's people that might associate with different traditions outside of the Western tradition, and even within the Western tradition, I think that while I respect Russell and Whitehead in the line that everything's just footnotes on Plato, and I appreciate the sentiment, I do think philosophy has moved on to importantly new and interesting things that come up after the classics, that the classics did in a huge way build a foundation for that. The answer to the question, how to understand Heidegger, is I do not know. The Continentals are definitely an area that I have much less background in. One day, we will get to them in a series, and I'll do more research and give you some ideas, but my goodness. And one of the reasons that frustrates me about the Continentals, and I'm sure there's some Continental philosophers out there that'll yell at me in the comments about this, but they are, in my opinion, much more difficult to get through and suss out the ideas of. They're just much more, maybe they're intuitive for some people. Like I said at the beginning, when I walked into a philosophy class, it felt like people were speaking the same language. When I read the Continentals, it feels like people are speaking a different language to me. It feels like they're not, I don't connect with them in the same way that I connect with analytic philosophers. So I don't know is the answer to how to understand Heidegger. What do you think would be the best time to start teaching philosophy? That's a great question. As young as possible, especially when it comes to logic. A lot of philosophical topics are things that people want to debate or argue about, and it would be really tough to get into a school curriculum, something like philosophy of religion, because that's so controversial, or all of these other things that would be going on with philosophy. But teaching something like logic is in many ways the basics for mathematics. And if you have actual logic being taught and argumentation being taught, everything else can build from that. So the best time to start teaching philosophy is in the primary schools, at least in terms of having a logic section to our math standards and our math curriculum. If you've watched, I have like one video up on philosophy of education talking about Dewey and the Common Core, and while in that video, I'm in some ways supporting the Common Core, and the Common Core does work to build more into, for anyone that is unaware, the Common Core is the set of standards in the U.S., federal standards that all the schools are using, or most of the schools are using these days. Anyway, while the mathematics standards do kind of build in some of those ideas about critical thinking, logical stuff, they don't explicitly teach logic. And I think explicitly teaching logic, at least, the other stuff can wait. The metaphysics, even the philosophy of religion, kind of the ethics, or some of those more applicable things might be able to wait. But I think that starting logic early and starting argumentation early would do amazing things, not just for kids' ability to do math and reasoning and these things, but when they grow up to be adults, maybe adults that haven't had a chance to go to college, they are at a point where they can actually look at a politician on TV and see, wait a second, that person used a fallacy there. That person's not arguing well. So those are my opinions on that. And if our point of education is to create an informed populace so that we can have a good democracy, then I think logic is something we should teach. Anyway, as a skeptic, you said that you suspend judgment on every thesis, but it's impossible to suspend action, because not doing anything is also choosing something. So does ethics apply to your actions? Well, That's a good question. Does ethics apply to the actions of a skeptic? Well, if you believe that there are normative ethical principles out there in the world, anyone's actions, despite what they believe, unless you think that their beliefs matter in what they're doing, are going to apply to their actions in some way. If your question is more kind of how do I pick particular actions that I choose, yeah, it's a long and complicated process in my brain that I couldn't fully understand. And that's when you go down to my skepticism, that's a lot about what I talk about. It's about proclivities. It's about the way that we act is importantly different from our beliefs. It seems to me that frequently people will say, oh yeah, I did that because of these reasons, but they've made up those reasons after the fact and they just did it because they wanted to or because they felt like it. It seems to me frequently that people will call something good or the better choice just because it was something that appealed to them or they liked. I would lean towards, though I wouldn't assent to the opinion, I would lean towards kind of an emotivist picture of ethics. So it seems to me in some sense, yeah, people act because of proclivities that they have. And one of those actions may be saying with their voice, I believe this is wrong. And they say that because they have a proclivity to say, I don't like that. I don't like that thing. Boo, wrongness. But that's my pitch. In terms of my own life, I personally have proclivities to do things such as some of you may be aware, do international development work and work with people who are in unequal situations, who have less privilege, who are in situations where they especially don't have access to education and those things. So those are things that I have a proclivity to do, and some people would call good or some people would call right, but it seems to me they're only calling it that because they like it or it makes them feel good or it makes them feel happy. So we'll move on because there are a lot of questions here. What do you think about Popkin's work on Pyrrhonism, mainly the history of skepticism from Savonarola to Bale? I will honestly say I have not read it, but that is a great recommendation, and I will read it very soon. Thank you. Next comment, more Nietzsche, please. Oh, Nietzsche is, yes, I would love to do more Nietzsche, and I appreciate whoever posted to Reddit my video on Nietzsche because it blew up amusingly. Here, I'll tell you an amusing anecdote. Pause on the philosophy for a sec. So the video on Nietzsche, it got published to Reddit, it got a huge number of views in a single day. That was the day that, if you've watched my channel and you're aware, so I was living in the Gambia, the presidential election was happening that day. Our internet was shut off for the entire country for 24 hours. So I had the video scheduled to go up. It went up when it did. The video published on Nietzsche, I had no idea what was going on. I was worried that people were going to be marching down the streets or causing all of these problems. The internet comes back on 24 hours later, and I see it has a huge number of views. I'm like, what happened to this situation? I checked it out. It was Reddit. Anyway, Nietzsche clearly was very popular, so we are definitely going to be doing more Nietzsche in the future. He's a fascinating philosopher, and more than anything, he is a misunderstood and misquoted philosopher, which is so frustrating. So, yes, I definitely want to do more Nietzsche. I want to help people understand Nietzsche better because clearly there's a lot of people out there that do not understand Nietzsche. So, that aside, there will be more Nietzsche. There's so many things I want to do more of, though, so eventually we'll get there. I'm fortunate to never seem to reach a point in this channel where I feel like I have run out of things. I always feel like I have a list of 5,000 things that I want to make videos on. So, yes, one day there will be more Nietzsche. Sorry, I'm scrolling through all of these chats that you guys are sending me, which is wonderful. Thank you to all of the people that are out there watching now and who are chatting and asking questions. I will do my best to get through all of them. I've sectioned off an hour for this video, which is as long as the little Hume video on the side goes. So we're about halfway done. I'll try to talk faster so I can get everyone in. So there's someone that's writing a paper for an undergraduate part of a philosophy conference next year. Has to submit an abstract that can't be longer than 500 words. In an abstract length, can I just present the main argument without also responding to an objection I raise in my whole paper? For example, could I write in an abstract like this? Here's the argument for this claim, and I don't know. Different people will tell you different things on exactly what to write in an abstract. I might mention that you are in the paper dealing with certain objections and certain responses to them. You definitely don't have to, in an abstract, give the entire argument and the entire objections and the entire set of responses, because then you'd just be writing the paper. But I might mention that you, blah, 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 this is my argument, this is the thing that I'm talking about, that nugget of wisdom that you're trying to center on, and then say, and I'll deal with objections and some responses to them. And just throw that as a sentence in there so that they're aware, oh, this isn't just you offering the argument. Maybe if you're dealing with an important objection, so if you're defending an argument that already exists out there, and there's an important objection that someone has offered to that argument, or you're finding a way to bring that objection in to a new argument that you're offering, mention that objection maybe by name or by what most people call it, but otherwise, I think you'd be okay. All right. Currently doing a paper on Aristotle. Please tell about him and his most well-known work. Check out my video on Aristotle. Who is Aristotle? He is one of the most famous philosophers of all time. And he might be... That video would be a great place for you to go. Someone saying, all the images were made automatically. Yeah, it would be great if we could... I'm sure someone could come up with a program that could make these images automatically and do this. But honestly, I think you get a lot more design choice in when you're making them and doing them through this process. I can make certain words pop a little bit more. I can change things around a little bit more. And it really is my own work. But thank you for the praise for doing this. It takes a long time, but it's fun. Ooh, is the universe contingent? If yes, what is the necessary being which is its cause? If no, why can I imagine a different universe? Ooh, fascinating question. So one day, once again, this is the long list of one day I want to do a video on this. One day we'll do a series on different views around modality. A fascinating view that might kind of answer this question is something along the views of David Lewis, where he proposes that basically modal realism, I think is what it's called in the common parlance, the idea that there are possible universes out there that are importantly separate from our universe that you couldn't reach in any way. There are possible worlds, real, physical, possible worlds out there somewhere that are all of the possibilities that you could imagine. So there's no necessary being because all of those universes just do exist. And when you're imagining a different universe, you're imagining that universe that exists. So the contingentness of this universe is in the idea that, well, it's one of many possible worlds, and there's nothing important about this world any more than there's nothing more important about where you are right now or what this moment is right now in time. It's just you happen to be placed on this world. I hope I'm representing Lewis's position correctly. Like I said, at some point we'll do a series on modality where we talk about all those different positions, modal fictionalism, combinatorialism or combinationalism, whatever Armstrong's position is. And we'll go into some of those different ideas about possible universes, but it is a good question. And the argument against the philosophy of religion argument that I think you're digging into there would be, well, okay, even if we set all that aside and we say, okay, this is we need a necessary being to hold this universe together to make this universe exist and not the other way around, because the response to what I just offered is, well, how does that whole multiverse exist? Why does it exist instead of not exist? We need something necessary to tie that down. That necessary thing could be a particle. It could be a single thing. The idea that it has to be the God of the Bible is such a frustrating leap that I made a video and song about how ridiculous it is. So, how much stock do you think we should put in live debate? A good question. I think that unfortunately these days a lot of philosophy, or the interesting philosophy, is done in papers that go back and forth between people, and you can go through these situations where one philosopher has posited something and others offered objections, and they offer responses, objections, because philosophers like to spend a lot of time thinking about what they're going to talk about. And what I see in live debate is frequently someone offering their argument, someone offering a response, and people just talking past each other, which is often very frustrating because they came up with their pre-written comments. They aren't either able to improvise what they want to be talking about, or they maybe don't feel comfortable improvising because they haven't spent enough time thinking about the new position that someone's offered. So live debate, while it can be engaging and interesting and a great way to get people excited about philosophy or something, I think that at the end of the day, if you really want to dig into the concepts, that would be, it's going to be reading through the papers, and doing that is going to get you a lot more to dig in. A series on higher order logic, yay! One day. My problem is I love doing logic series in big long strings because otherwise I'm never going to actually finish them. And we haven't had time to do that. So we're going to see what happens coming up. But I would love to do a series in higher order logic. And I will say, just like I said with philosophy of religion, I don't know when it's going to happen, but the next series is going to be Thomas Aquinas. The next series in logic, when we get to that, is going to be higher order logic and set theory. So it's coming. Introducing the young to philosophy early on, can you recommend some good reading for the younger child? Seems like there's a lack of material in that regard. So what I would recommend, I can't really give you a reading recommendation, but what I can give you are kind of puzzles and things. So there's these famous puzzles where you sit around and there's like 5 people and 5 hats. So there's Al, Bernie, Carl, Deirdre, and Emily, and there's 5 hats that are A, B, C, D, and E, and we have to figure out which hat goes on which person. No one has the same letter hat as begins their name, and something like that. You get a series of logical statements that then you are ended up with deciding, oh, this hat goes on this person, this hat goes on that person, and puzzles like that. For kids aren't going to be able to read a philosophical text as much. At least in my experience. I would love if someone were to go out and develop some of these, but if you want to develop some of that material, go out, do it. It's easy to self-publish things these days. One day as a future goal, I would love to write texts for younger children to teach them about philosophy. But I have too many videos to make between now and then. They're definitely, so I would agree with the statement that there's a lack of material in this regard. Why are most philosophers moral realists, is I think what I just saw. I don't know. Skepticism, once again. I can always say, I don't know to any of these questions. But if I had to guess, if you pushed me and made me take a guess, I would say that because people make them feel really guilty if they say things like good and bad don't exist. There's a lot of societal pressure to believe in good and bad, because if you don't believe in good and bad, oh, clearly you're evil, because that's how we portray villains in a lot of things. So that would be my guess if I had to hazard a guess. All right. Would you suggest spoon-feeding particular sections of specific works? Oh, this is back to kids, and build from there with a guiding hand. It's tough, because philosophy, it comes down to reading primary texts, and primary texts are difficult. I wouldn't say focus on specific works. I would say focus on big ideas. If you really want to get, my suggestion was focus on logic. But if you really want to get, like, say at a middle school age, say at even a high school age, get into some of those bigger concepts, I wouldn't go for the actual primary text. I wouldn't even go for kind of professional secondary texts that deal with the same things. I would talk about the big concepts. I would talk about an idea like freedom. So free will, I can explain the ideas of free will to a middle school kid and they'll get it. I can explain that there's the idea that everything works in a determined way or a deterministic way versus everything works in a way that you can actually break the laws of physics and do that, or that free will means something else. Like, I can explain those things to a kid and they're going to get it. The actual text is going to be a lot harder. If they show interest in it or they want to push forward on it, maybe then give them the actual text, but it'll be tough. The prospect of addressing a philosophical theory of everything in a system-building style. I would love it if we could do that. The problem is, whenever someone even gets to a philosophical theory of a certain point, usually they run into problems, hence skepticism. Skepticism is great. Skepticism is a theory of everything because I don't know anything. Problem solved. You ask me any question, I can just say, I don't know. And we're done. I think it is very difficult to build a theory of everything because every one of our theories, even in small areas, seems to run into its own problems or run into its own objections. So, difficult, cool if we could do it. Of attempts to answer the important questions in a coherent way. Oh, this is a continuing of that. Important questions in a coherent way, providing a complete picture of the world. Once again, it would be great if we could do it, but it's difficult because you answer a question in something that seems like a perfectly coherent and easy way, there's a billion objections to it. And philosophy values those objections, and it values that debate. What's your position about education and philosophy in early childhood? We keep getting this question. Yes, educate young kids more on philosophy. I'd say, as I was saying earlier, start logic young, and then move on to general topics in things like metaphysics or ethics in middle school or high school. But it's a difficult thing to do. I'd say logic is the most important thing. Understanding logic, arguments, and even the methods of philosophy, those would be the central things. Anything else, it would just be to keep kids engaged and keep kids interested and maybe reading some higher level text. From where does he take the questions? He's taking the questions from the live chat. He's just slow at getting to them. What kind of quantum mechanical interpretations do you think is the most persuasive, since they all have such counterintuitive implications? That's a great question. Quantum mechanics is difficult because I think it is insufficiently understood by scientists for anyone to put together a perfect or great interpretation. If you go back to my ideas on philosophy of science, I think the problem is right now we're still at a paradigm where we don't have all the bugs worked out. Our paradigm right now, we have a lot of contradictions that we run into. There are things like dark matter and dark energy, and why we can't come up with a grand unifying theory of that don't quite work out yet. And that to me signals we need a paradigm shift before we can actually understand this data in a more interesting way. So I would say look up Thomas Kuhn if you don't understand what I'm saying. But I would say a paradigm shift is required before we can fully understand the implications of the data we're receiving in quantum mechanics and other fields in kind of cutting-edge science, because there seem to be contradictions or problems in those, and the only way we can get past those is through a paradigm shift. Yes, he's doing it from the chat. Definitely. Are you still responding to questions in older videos? Because I am woefully behind. So... While over the summer, I was very, very busy with my job. It required me to be up country and away from internet for long periods of time, and then I had to move, which left me unable to respond to a lot of questions in older videos and comments. I love to respond to comments. Responding to comments is one of my favorite things to do on the channel, and I'm frustrated that I haven't gotten the chance to respond to all the comments I would like to. I would love to keep responding to comments in older videos, but I don't always get around to it. I do my best to keep up with it. And like I said, I love those debates, and those things are where I learn new and interesting things about philosophy, and people help me with that. So I would love to keep doing that. If you have a comment that hasn't gotten responded to, I apologize. The last couple months have been very, very busy for me, and I have to balance this with everything else I'm doing in my life, because unfortunately, philosophy don't pay the bills. See, this chat keeps jumping on me, and... Do you think the true nature of consciousness will ever be discovered? If so, can it be discovered using the philosophical method or modal logic, etc.? Interesting. So, let me answer the second question first. So, if it can be discovered can it be discovered with philosophical methods or modal logic and these things? So, do I think that conclusively, if someone came up with a beautiful argument about consciousness, everyone would immediately assent to it and to agree to it? Probably not. But do I think that philosophy plays an important role in the process of discovering and understanding consciousness? Yes. I think that philosophy and science both will play important roles in this process. It seems to me right now consciousness seems like an insoluble problem, but if you look at history, especially the history of science, you see that there have been insoluble problems for decades and decades and centuries, and everyone's like, we'll never figure this out, or we'll never solve this, and then 100 years later, someone else comes up with it. I think that eventually we may understand consciousness. We might not. I don't know. I'm a skeptic, so I can get away with that. But if it can be discovered, I'd be skeptical of it being discovered using solely philosophical methods alone. But I'm also skeptical of it being discovered solely using scientific methods alone either. I think that we need science and philosophy working together to answer those questions or work with that. All right, 2 questions. Does a skeptic make assertions about reality when they say that they adhere to appearances, that there are appearances, or have proclivities? So it's a good question. I clearly make a lot of statements like, oh, it seems to me like this. I feel this thing. What I would say is you have different propositional attitudes other than belief. The propositional attitude that the skeptic is averse to is belief. But the skeptic can have other propositional attitudes like feelings or seemings or proclivities. And when they make statements about having those, they're not claiming that they believe them. They're just trying to help describe their mental state in words that other people understand, but not expressing firmly held beliefs or decisions. So when skeptics make assertions about reality, does that mean that they're claiming that they actually believe those assertions? No, they're trying to communicate. It's a proclivity to want to communicate with other people, if that makes sense. Hopefully that answers the question. It's a tough question, I agree, and one day we'll go into more in skepticism and defend a lot of the objections that I've received in comments and these things. Was Ayn Rand a good philosopher? That's a subject for a whole set of videos. The short answer I will give is clearly Ayn Rand was very convincing to a lot of people and provided some interesting ideas. So a good philosopher, I don't know. But a philosopher that was influential, most certainly. And that offered some interesting ideas, yes. One day, as with all these things, I'd love to do a series on Ayn Rand and digging into that. I think that people take some of Ayn Rand's ideas to a certain degree that may be frustrated with me or might disagree with her, but just because you disagree with someone doesn't make them a bad philosopher necessarily. Can you bump the Elenkis video to the top of the list about above Nietzsche? Elenkis video, doing a video on Socrates Elenkis. Can I bump it to the top of the list? I have no idea. So if you, my process for developing which video I'm going to do is determined a lot by the amount of work I have in other places. If I have a lot of free time, usually I'll try to do a longer video. I'll try to churn out one of my big truth videos. If I don't have much time, I'll do like a 90-second philosophy video, so to give you a sense of my process. But I will tell you, if you want a video on a specific topic, go to Patreon, donate $10 a month, pledge $10 a month, and I will make that video, if I can, within the month. So that is a way for you to have a bit more influence on what's going on. I would love to do a video on the Elenkis. I would love to do a video on Nietzsche. I would love to do videos on this, that, and the other thing. But I have a large list of things that I'm in the process of developing, and just adding more, once again, leaves me with stuff. Leaves me on a long list of where I am right now of having a lot of series that are not finished. 1 box or 2 boxes? I don't even know. Is that like 1 box or 2 boxes for how I'm building Hume? Sometimes I do them in 2s, sometimes I do them in 1. I'm not sure. Why am I so interested in paradoxes? Because paradoxes are so cool. I was fascinated with paradoxes from a very young age. I don't know why. Because they're problems in logic. Because they're problems in our understanding. They're things like I was talking about earlier with signaling that we need a paradigm shift. There's something that signals that there's a problem with our understanding of this concept. We need to shift things around to avoid this paradox. Have I considered doing some live discussions on skepticism with other philosophers on YouTube? Alex Malpass and his Thoughtology channel. I'd love to check it out. If you convince him to do a live discussion with me, I'll do a live discussion with him, especially now that I'm back in the States. When I was in West Africa and I couldn't get reliable internet, it couldn't really happen. But Yes, go talk to that person or a range of other philosophers, and I would love to do a live discussion with someone like that. Yes. How did I get started working in philanthropy? Not philosophy, philanthropy. I would say for philanthropy, I'd say development. Let's call it international development because I have some feelings about the word philanthropy, but that's a subject of a whole other video. I would say that it has a lot to do with the fact that I feel like I had a lot of advantages throughout my life, and I feel there are a lot of people in the world that did not have those advantages, and I think it's important to share those advantages with other people, or at least I have a proclivity to do that because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel good to help other people and feel like I'm helping other people. There's a conception of if there were this can give you an idea of kind of how modal logic can play into ethics. If there were two possible worlds, one where you existed and one where you didn't exist and everything else were identical, the idea of doing everything you can to change that world for things that you feel good about over the other world, it's kind of the It's a Wonderful Life theory of ethics, so I'll throw that one out for you. What do you think of the implication of fractals and the laws of nature? As in, I'm not sure. We're probably gonna run out of time for you to give me a response on that, but I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. That fractals exist in nature. It seems to me that that's just a form that is easy for things to grow in, so it can grow larger and larger progressively without having to change the basic kind of rules in biology in that. But maybe clarify the question. Maybe I'll get a chance to get to it. Have I stated how Newton is actually named Newtonian? I don't know if I've stated that. I have done very little research into Newton's name. Okay, that's what you were after. Daughter coming into middle school and suddenly expressed interest in big ideas. Yeah, I would say big ideas. Stick with that. She heard a lecture on Hume and causation with me during a long road trip. Cool. Kids will, if you show them a really complicated text, they're going to balk at it and be like, "Oh, I don't like this." But if you give them the basic big ideas, that'll be great. Well, thank you for watching. Awesome. So, oh goodness, this chat is jumping around. All right. Oh, and we're almost out of time. There's so many things that I want to get to. All right, we're going to finish at an hour, but I will do my best to answer any questions that I didn't get to in comments afterward, because I actually have time to do comments these days. Yay! Eventually, we'll get started back on that. I am going to be busy with the website, as I said at the top. We are developing a website. For anyone that has joined us since then, we are developing a website where you can actually have interactive, do quizzes, do those kind of things, take tests based on the videos that you watch. Okay, have a question, been thinking about a lot lately. Do you agree with the phrase from Stephen Hawking that philosophy is dead and science replaced it, or something like that? No, I definitely don't agree with Stephen Hawking on that. My opinions on philosophy being dead and science replacing it? No. Philosophy is, watch the beginning of my map of philosophy for my ideas on this. Philosophy used to be everything that we studied. It's love of knowledge. People still get PhDs. But science has replaced areas of philosophy, certainly. Science has replaced natural philosophy in a huge way. But philosophy is still the thing that connects science to other disciplines. It's why you can see a scientist and a theologian talking past each other, but a philosopher can talk to either of them. Because philosophy is the methodology that connects those different disciplines, that gives them something to disagree on or talk with. It's also the thing that allows for us to even use the scientific method and connect that importantly with truth. While I'm very skeptical of the scientific method and offer a lot of those things, there are other philosophers that believe you can completely underwrite the scientific method with philosophy. And so I think philosophy is extremely important for science, and philosophy is the thing that questions, well, maybe science isn't doing this well, or maybe the scientific method doesn't apply to things that say you can't have empirical evidence for. I think Stephen Hawking might be feeling a little threatened because philosophy pushes a lot on cosmology, is saying, this is a really sketchy thing to call science. But that's beside the point. Do I believe in any form of transhumanism is moving beyond our limits as humans a virtue worth pursuing? Well, I don't believe in anything because I'm a skeptic. I haven't looked into transhumanism enough to have any more specific opinions than that. Moving beyond our limits as humans, a virtue worth pursuing, I think there's a contradiction in that statement. If we actually have limits as humans, moving beyond them would mean that we don't have limits. But if we are not able to move beyond those limits, then the question is moot. So either we have limits and we can't move beyond them, or we don't have limits, and so it wouldn't be a virtue or wouldn't be a question in the first place. How do I think philosophy will shape computer science in the near future? Great question. I think that there's two big things in computer science you can think about. I think at some point we are going to maybe become convinced that machines do have mind in some way. Not because I think there's arguments that machines already have mind. Machines seem a lot smarter than some of the animals that we have, and it seems that machines can do things that people can't. So I think there's an argument for maybe machines do have mind. It's not going to be some computer saying, I am alive, that brings about AI or that. It's going to be, in philosophy, importantly, an understanding of maybe we have some ethical responsibilities towards machines at some point. So I think that's one interesting question. I think the other interesting question, which is probably what people will talk a lot more about, is questions in ethics around computer science and the ethics of freedom of information and the ethics of downloading illegal movies and these kind of things. Is it ethical for me to do this? Is it ethical for me to do that in this new kind of wild west of the internet? Ha! Can't think of anything more to ask. Good. Well, hopefully I've answered a lot of things. Will there be more streams like this one? Yes, I would love to do more streams like this one. Yay! Someone else said do more live stream Q&As. Yes, I would love to. We are running out of time. We got about 4 minutes left. I'll see if I can answer a couple more answers. Like I said, if your question didn't get answered, I'll do my best to answer it in the comments on this video. I'm not exactly sure how these live stream things work, but hopefully I'll be able to get it in comments somewhere and respond to it. How do I act based on... I should do more live stream Q&As. Great. I would love to. Thanks for trying to respond to every question. We're trying. How do you act based on proclivities on things like voting? Great question. So if you saw the whole of my democracy series, or the voting series, I mentioned at one point, I'm going to be voting for Hillary Clinton, even though I was voting from abroad. Or have already, rather. Anyway, how do I make those decisions based on proclivities? I have particular proclivities, such as I've spent a lot of time in communities around the world, and that has influenced how I see those communities and what I feel based on that. And I think people come up with high-minded ideas. I was voting for these ideas. I was voting for this. People how it seems to me people vote on how they feel much more than how they think, and then they feel a certain way and then they come up with a lot of ideas to justify that. So I have a lot of feelings of empathy towards things like minority groups, and that leads me to vote for someone. But I think voting based on belief, like I believe this person will do something for the future. I think in politics especially you should have skepticism. In politics you should be very skeptical, because it seems that there are many, many, many politicians that claim one thing and then do something completely different. So what do we have but feelings to vote on? So you are growing as a YouTube channel, and I know it says on your Patreon that you're not interested in doing some other more profitable work, but what about making videos? What if I had 100,000 subs? I would love to spend... I'm not interested in doing some other more profitable work, but what about making videos? What if I had, if I had a lot of subs, if I was at the point where I could make a living on YouTube between Patreon and advertising, I would love to spend more time, or such to the point that I could be doing this full time or something like that. I would love to do that. There are other things in my life that I will still continue doing, and they will probably include working and doing development work and things like that. But if I could have more time to do YouTube and spend more time doing that and be making money through that, I would absolutely love to do that and spend less time on finding specific jobs that need to pay the bills. So, a great question. I would love to be at that point. We're definitely not there yet. And right now I'm trying to reinvest a lot of that money in things like the website, in developing the programs and those things that need to make those quizzes run. All right, we are almost out of time. What is the... So we have about 30 seconds left, and then I think we're going to stop. I don't know. Yeah, the Hume video is almost done. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, if I didn't get to your question, I really apologize. Thank you for everyone that watched this stream right now, that is hopefully watching a future version of this stream. Thank you for all of your great questions. We will definitely do another live Q&A like this. This was really fun. I really enjoyed this. And I felt like I got to respond to some of the questions out there. I'll try to respond to any questions I didn't get to in the comments afterward. But for now, I would advise keep your eyes out for when we're ready with the website, because that's going to be a cool place for people to test their own understandings of philosophy and test things out. I'll have an announcement on that coming up soon, but until then, we will have some basics up on the website. If you want to kind of beta test it for me, try things out, leave responses in the comments on one of my YouTube videos and say, oh, this worked out really well. Oh, this isn't working. I think there's also a comment functionality on the website right now, but like I said, things are very much in beta or alpha testing, and we're still trying to figure out how that works. So thanks to everyone for being here. Thank you so much for helping us make it to 20,000 subscribers. Stay tuned for future live streams, as has been requested. And stay tuned for more videos. As always, watch this video and more here at Carneades.org. And stay skeptical, everybody.